Welcome to Last Exit with Valerie Springer on Campus and City Radio 94.4.
Ihr Lieben, da bin ich wieder. Danke, dass ihr eingeschaltet habt. Heute habe ich ein Interview für euch mit der preisgekrönten Dokumentarfilmerin Julia Barnes. Sie ist Kanadierin und Umweltschützerin und erst 24 Jahre alt. Ihr zweiter Film, Bright Green Lies, hat gerade Premiere gehabt. Ich habe für den Film die deutschen Untertitel gemacht und anlässlich der Uraufführung hat Julia mir für euch ein Interview gegeben, hier exklusiv im deutschen Sprachraum auf Campus und City Radio 94.4. Mit 16 Jahren hat Julia den Dokumentarfilm Revolution von Rob Stewart gesehen, in dem die Schönheit unserer Welt gezeigt wird und deren Zerstörung. Und das hat ihr junges Leben verändert. Julia hat sich eine Kamera gekauft, hat tauchen gelernt und 3 Jahre lang den Ozeanfilm Sea of Life gedreht. Der ist 2016 herausgekommen und hat auf der ganzen Welt Preise abgeräumt. Und vor 3 Wochen hat sie ihren neuen Film Bright Green Lies vorgestellt, mit dem sie inzwischen auch schon zu vielen internationalen Screenings eingeladen worden ist. Jetzt lasse ich sie einmal erzählen, wie sie zum Film gekommen ist. Das Interview habe ich in Englisch geführt und zum Verständnis poste ich das Transkript auch auf Deutsch.
I'm 24 years old. I make documentaries. I actually didn't go to film school after high school. I've just been full on making documentaries. I started making films when I was 16, and I was just really inspired because I had seen a documentary about what was happening to the natural world and the fact that we're in a mass extinction and we're expected to lose all the world's fish and coral reefs and rainforests by the middle of the century. And I couldn't believe I hadn't known that that was happening, and I wanted to do everything I possibly could to turn it around. So I left the theater thinking this is what I'm going to dedicate my life to, and it took me about a week to decide to start making documentaries. I bought a camera and learned how to scuba dive and decided to make a film about what was happening to the ocean. So I spent the next 3 years making a film called Sea of Life, looking at things like ocean acidification and industrial fishing and the warming of the ocean and the impact that this is having on all life on the planet. Because even the plankton who produce most of the oxygen in the air that we breathe are under threat. 40% of them are already gone, and we're losing them pretty quickly because of the impact that industrial civilization is having on the ocean.
Julias neuer Film Bright Green Lies, der gerade in Kanada seine wirklich aufsehenerregende Premiere gefeiert hat, basiert auf dem gleichnamigen Buch von Derek Jensen, Lyra Keith und Max Wilbert. Der Pulitzer-Preisträger Chris Hedges schreibt darüber, ich lese vor: Bright Green Lies entlarvt die Heuchelei und den Bankrott der führenden Umweltgruppen und ihrer prominentesten Cheerleader. Den bekanntesten Umweltschützern geht es nicht darum, die Wahrheit zu sagen oder gar rationale Lösungen aufzuzeigen, um den drohenden Ökozid abzuschwächen, sondern sie geben sich einer verlogenen und selbstsüchtigen Täuschung hin, die auf Kosten der Realität Trost spenden soll. Sie versäumen es, das Offensichtliche auszusprechen: Wir können uns nicht weiter in hedonistischem Konsum und industrieller Expansion suhlen und als Spezies überleben. Die Umweltdebatte ist durch den Wunsch der Industrienationen, das Unhaltbare aufrechtzuerhalten, verzerrt worden. Alle Debatten über Umweltpolitik müssen damit beginnen, nicht die Wünsche der menschlichen Spezies zu schützen, sondern die Unantastbarkeit der Erde selbst. Wir weigern uns, die richtigen Fragen zu stellen, weil diese Fragen eine nackte Wahrheit aufdecken, Wir können so nicht weiterleben. Dies zu tun ist eine selbstmörderische Dummheit. Zitat Ende vom Pulitzer-Preisträger Chris Hedges über das Buch Bright Green Lies, das der Ausgangspunkt von Julia Barnes' neuer Dokumentation ist. Eine radikale Veränderung unseres Lebens wäre nicht nur, sondern ist also notwendig. Meine Frage an Julia: Kann diese Veränderung mit demokratischen Mitteln überhaupt erreicht werden?
It's a really good question. There's a couple problems with democracy. One is the fact that we think we live in a democracy, and we don't. I mean, 99.99999% of species don't get a vote. And even among those of us who do, what we're choosing between are two slightly different variations on the same thing. I mean, you get to choose between parties that universally support infinite economic growth and extractive industries and are very much beholden to the corporations that are harming the natural world. We don't get much of a choice. We don't get to vote for degrowth or sustainable way of living. The other problem with democracy is that even if it did function, a democracy relies on the majority of people making sound decisions. And the majority of people in industrial civilization are not sane. And I think the majority of people would not necessarily make decisions that have the best interest of the natural world or the future at heart. Far too many feel entitled to receive the benefits that come to them at the expense of the living world. Just because the majority of the population believes something or wants something doesn't mean it's right. I don't think that we can rely on democracy to solve our problems, and I don't think that the changes we need will come from masses of people making the right decisions. But that doesn't mean that change can't happen. I think small numbers of people can have a tremendous amount of power. And it's true right now that there are very small numbers of people that are perpetrating these destructive industries. And they're not doing it by consensus. They're not doing it by democracy. They're not doing it because everyone voted and said, that's a good idea, let's cut down all the forests and scoop all the fish out of the ocean. They're using force, and they don't have the monopoly on force. War is being waged against the natural world right now, and the way that you win a war is by depriving your enemy of their ability to wage war. People can, and many people are, taking direct action to stop the industries that are destroying life on the planet, putting themselves between these industries and what's left of the natural world. Whenever we think about an action, we should be strategic rather than symbolic. I think far too much of what passes for activism today is symbolic actions that don't actually threaten the system.
Meine nächste Frage an Julia: Inwieweit kann den ganz normalen Menschen die Wahrheit zugemutet werden? Bricht Panik aus, wenn man offen darüber diskutiert, wie es tatsächlich um die zu erwartende Zukunft unserer Welt bestellt ist?
It depends on what people we're talking about. Everybody seems to have a different version of the truth. And the interesting thing is, I think a lot of the lies that are being told today, people genuinely believe them. I'm not sure that everyone is aware when they're telling lies. Derek has this great line, which is, in order to maintain this way of living, we must tell lies to each other and especially to ourselves. It is not necessary that these lies be particularly believable, merely that they be erected as barriers to truth. So lies are really pervasive in this culture, but there are several people who are telling the truth about the situation that we're in, many people telling aspects of the truth. And I think there's two parts to this. There's telling the truth is one thing, but living as if that truth was real is an entirely different thing. And I think there are more people who understand the truth than there are people who live their lives accordingly. And the next part of the question, will panic break out if one openly discusses how the expected future of our world really is? I don't think that panic would break out at all, because there are many people who have been openly discussing what's happening, and the response is more that of denial or compartmentalization of the information, but the response is never panic.
Meine nächste Frage an Julia war, warum Ihrer Meinung nach diese Themen nicht so breit diskutiert werden, wie sie es müssten. Was glaubt sie, ist der Grund dafür, dass das nicht die oberste und allerwichtigste Priorität ist? Geld, Macht, Konzerne oder einfach nur absolute Ignoranz?
You know, I don't understand why this isn't the top priority. This is something that really frustrated me as a 16-year-old kid who had just learned about what was happening to the natural world. And I would be sitting in a classroom listening to people around me talk about what television shows they had watched last night or what clothing they wanted to go shopping for. And I'd be getting a lesson on some subject that just seemed completely irrelevant to the reality of what was happening. And I'm sitting there thinking about how much of the world is being lost right now as we live in this culture that is obsessed with trivialities. And I'm sitting in a schooling system that is preparing me for a future that doesn't exist. And it's one thing to say that maybe people just don't know, but a lot of people do know what's happening, and it is being talked about to some extent. And I think a lot of people would rather just look the other way. And I don't understand that mindset because I've never had it. I do know that the institutions we have, that the mass media we have, is very much funded and supported and owned by people who have an interest in maintaining the system that we have and in not taking these issues as seriously as they should be, or if they are talked about, diverting people's attention into false solutions and things that don't threaten the status quo. And that's what we see. The people who rise to the fore of mainstream environmentalism and the people who end up talking on national television are the ones who will offer solar and wind as solutions and talk about saving civilization and wanting to save the very system that is destroying life on the planet. They won't have an analysis that looks at the root causes of the problems or that challenges the status quo. And there's a reason for that. They get to the fore of environmentalism because that is the message that they put out, and because that is the message that gets funded and that is palatable for this industrial civilization, for the mass media, for people to hear.
Die nächste Frage, die ich Julia gestellt habe: Sollte das Schulsystem nicht so ergänzt werden, dass junge Menschen nicht nur theoretisch etwas über Klimaschutz und Umweltschutz lernen, sondern sozusagen konkrete Survival Skills erlernen, damit sie den normalen Alltag meistern können, wenn sich die Welt verändern wird, und zusätzlich eine psychologische Ausbildung bekommen, um mit den zu erwartenden Unruhen sozial, menschlich und würdevoll umgehen zu können.
You know, it's really interesting because I was at a museum in Toronto. It's called the Royal Ontario Museum. And I ended up learning something there about how the school system was originally created and why. And basically it was intended to not so much to educate children, but to teach them skills that would make them into good workers for the industrial capitalist system. So it was intended to teach them to be punctual, to show up on time, and to respect authority, and to be obedient, and to be good workers. And the same implicit messages are inherent in the school system today. And certainly a lot of what gets taught and what doesn't get taught has to do with the fact that the school system is funded by government institutions, and you know, they want the message to be a certain thing. It is a complete failure of the school system that we are not taught from day one about what's happening to our planet, about the most important issues that are going on right now. It wasn't until I was in grade 7 that our class first learned about climate change, and we were taught that it was a faraway issue that we would never have to worry about, and that scientists had already come up with a solution. All we had to do was wait for a bunch of solar panels and wind turbines to be manufactured and everything would be okay. If we're going to continue having a school system, certainly the curriculum could be vastly improved. And, kids should be sat down from day one and told what the situation is and what kind of future they're heading towards. I think they have the right to know about it and to plan their lives accordingly. And absolutely, it would be amazing if people could be taught some real practical skills about how to live in place and how to grow or gather your own food, how to not be dependent on this global industrial system, and how to live without industrial electricity and all these things that will not be here very much longer. The school system is very much preparing kids for a world that's not going to exist. It's streamlining them into jobs that will probably not be relevant in 25 or 50 years' time. And most of us are absolutely missing those most basic human skills that we should have for how to live on this planet.
Nächste Frage an Julia. Wie sollten Eltern ihre Kinder auf diese Situation vorbereiten?
I don't think I fully know the answer to that question, but I think parents can certainly fill in where the school system fails, or if they have the opportunity to homeschool their children and teach them things that are important or let them learn about what they're interested in. Parents can certainly model a healthy respect for the natural world, and they can model behavior that treats all life as sentient and as sacred. And that's something that we're really missing in this culture. I think there's a lot of opportunities to do better in the relationships that we have with the natural world, and for young people to pick up on that and see that and learn from that.
Ja, und dann habe ich Julia gefragt, wie sie persönlich damit umgeht, dass alles, was wir für selbstverständlich halten, in 50 Jahren vielleicht nicht mehr da sein wird.
I look forward to it. If by everything we take for granted, we mean the luxuries and conveniences of industrial civilization. If by everything we take for granted, we mean life on the planet, then that's a whole other question. But I enjoy the conveniences of industrial civilization while they're around. I have coconut ice cream in my freezer, but I am so ready and so looking forward to living without industrial electricity and living without a lot of these conveniences. I really don't like the fact that I spend so much time every day staring at a computer screen. I think for all the supposed benefits that we gain from living in the center of empire in industrial civilization, I think we also lose a lot. And some of the times I have been happiest in my life have been living without electricity, living in parts of the world with no air conditioning, none of these modern conveniences, and, just when I've gone camping and lived in a very simple way. I think that's the most fulfilling way to live. And when these luxuries go away, when this system stops destroying, I will know that there's a pretty good chance that life on the planet will continue into the future, and that will make me so happy. That's all I really care about. I mean, my personal life and my personal comfort is insignificant. I want for there to be a future for all other species on this planet.
Ich wollte von Julia wissen, welche Möglichkeiten sie sieht, gegen Konzerne und Finanzkonglomerate vorzugehen, Kann man denn überhaupt etwas tun?
Absolutely. People are doing this every day all around the world, and certainly not enough of them. But I know that there are activists right now blockading the site of a proposed lithium mine in Nevada. There are activists blockading some of the last old-growth forests in British Columbia to prevent them from being cut down. People are taking action, direct action, all the time. And we need so much more, and we need so much more strategic action being taken on all levels.
Und weiter wollte ich von Julia wissen, ob sie daran glaubt, dass es noch eine Rettung für die Zivilisation gibt.
Civilization is inherently unsustainable, and I tend to agree with Derek Jensen's definition of civilization. Civilization is a way of living characterized by the growth of cities, and cities require the routine importation of resources. They require expansion and genocide and colonization of ever larger areas in order to bring in the materials that they need to keep going. And we see all around us the results of modern industrial civilization, and the result is the destruction of the world. This isn't a mistake. This isn't something that can just be tweaked and changed. This is inherent and functional to the system. But civilization is not the only way to live. And there are indigenous cultures all around the world that show how to live sustainably, how to live in place without destroying a place. So it can be done. And I don't mean to say it's going to be an easy process, getting from where things are to there, and with an entire culture that needs to change and so many people's mindsets that are out of touch with reality. Most people living within industrial civilization are literally insane. But it is at least physically possible to live in a different way, to abandon this crazy system and recognize that it hasn't served us, and it has certainly not served the natural world. And it just isn't working for anyone, and it should be stopped. Civilization has no future.
Meine letzte Frage an Julia war, sollte ein Klimanotstand ausgerufen werden?
Okay, this is really interesting because I'm living in a city, and a country, in fact, where a climate emergency has been declared. And I've seen the result of this, and it's probably not what you would think. I mean, in practicality, the declaration of a climate emergency has simply meant that some subsidies have been set aside, some funding has been set aside for what they call mitigation. So things like flood prevention and changing of infrastructure. And so the declaration of a climate emergency has basically meant that they're putting in place some measures to protect the industrial system. It has not meant that action has been taken to curb our emissions, any kind of meaningful action. It has not meant that much of anything has been done for the natural world. It's kind of just been a subsidy grab for the city. And what they're doing by declaring a climate emergency is they're taking as a given the fact that things are only going to get worse. And they're planning for that, and they're expecting that, and they're not really putting in an effort to stop that from happening. On a country level, there was an article that came out, and this is true, this really happened, that it said Canada declares a climate emergency on Monday and buys a pipeline on Tuesday. And I don't remember what exact day of the week it was, but this is what happened. I mean, the country declares a climate emergency, and then they buy a tar sands pipeline that's going to transport fossil fuels. So they're fully investing and planning on keeping things going as they are. This whole climate emergency catchphrase, I don't know. It seems to just mean more of the same.
Das war also Julia Barnes, erst 24-jährige, vielfach preisgekrönte Dokumentarfilmerin aus Kanada. Ich habe mit ihr über ihren Film Bright Green Lies gesprochen, der jetzt gerade seine wunderbare Premiere hatte. Ich habe hier schon einmal darüber gesprochen, dass ich immer wieder mit der Frage konfrontiert werde, ob es den Klimawandel überhaupt gibt. Das zu beantworten überlasse ich Wissenschaftlern und Forschern, die ja doch recht einhellig der Meinung zu sein scheinen, dass es ihn gibt. Die zukünftige Entwicklung wird darauf jedenfalls eine eindeutige Antwort liefern. Abgesehen davon, also ob das Klima sich wandelt, und zwar so, dass die natürliche Welt in einem erheblichen Maße zerstört wird, und ob das menschengemacht ist oder naturgegeben, also abgesehen davon bin ich der Meinung, dass unsere Zivilisation auf Ausbeutung, Raubzug, Unterdrückung und der Zerstörung der natürlichen Welt aufgebaut ist. Und das ist eine Tatsache. Das ist erschreckend, es ist grausam, alles andere als menschenwürdig. Das hat mit Würde nicht das Geringste zu tun. Wir, die wir in der sogenannten westlichen Hemisphäre im Speckmantel der Welt wie die sprichwörtliche Made im Speck leben, sollten uns dessen bewusst sein, dass unsere Ahnen, die europäischen Vorfahren und Eroberer, uns ein wunderbares Luxusleben geschaffen haben, dass das aber eben auf Ausbeutung, Unterdrückung, Raubzug und Zerstörung beruht. Und dass unsere wunderbare Zivilisation erst recht seit der industriellen Revolution verheerende Auswirkungen auf die natürliche Welt hat, ja, das ist eben auch eine Tatsache. Und sich dieser Tatsache zu stellen, das ist auch für mich ein Dilemma. Schließlich lebe ich in diesem System und von diesem System. Ich danke allen, die sich mit diesem Dilemma auseinandersetzen. Danke hier in dieser Sendung vor allem der vielfach ausgezeichneten Filmemacherin Julia Barnes, die so jung schon als 16-jähriger Teenager begriffen hat, dass ziemlich viel falsch läuft. Ich bedanke mich bei euch fürs Zuhören. Habt einen wunderschönen Mai. Habt es fein.
Thanks for listening to Last Exit with Valerie Springer on Campus and City Radio 94.4.